Historical Society of the United States Courts in the Eighth Circuit was incorporated as a not-for-profit organization in May of 1985. The purpose of the organization is to collect and preserve historical information of the United States courts in the Eighth Circuit. The Nebraska District Court Historical Society was formed as one of the 11 branches of this corporation. As part of its efforts to gather historical information on the Nebraska District Court, the Society presents this oral history by the Honorable Richard Robinson, who has served actively on the District Court bench in Nebraska, is currently serving as a senior judge. I am Richard Shagrew of the Creighton University School of Law. Judge Robinson, welcome and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to share with us some memories of your history as a distinguished attorney, as a great judge, and as a friend to many who have passed through our profession. You came to law school as a young man after having gone to high school here in Omaha at Central High School primarily, wasn't it?
No, I started at Central, ended up at High School of Commerce, as it was called.
Which is then technical high school later on.
Technical.
And then you came to the Creighton undergraduate school for a while?
Right.
And the Creighton Law School.
For 2.5 years, and then 3 years at the law school.
3 years at the law school. Was law school very different in the days that you were there from what you understand from the young men and women coming out today?
Oh, I suppose not. It was as difficult for them as it was for me. It was hard.
The young people today look forward to an opportunity when they're in school either to have a part-time job or an internship of some kind. Were those types of opportunities available to you?
Well, they were for me. Otherwise, I never would have been able to go to law school. But I had worked while I was in high school at the old Grandin Electric Company, and I had many jobs. But while I thought it was tough at the time, in retrospect, I realized after I finally got out, started practicing, many of the acquaintanceships that I made in that work and that effort, it turned out to be clients, and so everything has its own reward, I guess.
If there was any one thing that inspired you to take up the study of law, what would that have been?
Oh, actually, as early as grade school, I had a teacher. She's long gone now, but she always talked about lawyers and the great people they were, and it kind of hit a spark, and not much more than that. And then when I got to high school, perhaps the second or third week I was there, I met Roman Rushka, later Senator Roman Rushka, and a pal of his, Jerry Kutak, who is now retired but was chairman of the board of the insurance company in Indiana, and who was the father of later Bob Kutak, who turned out to be my first law clerk. Well, Bob and Jerry were on the debating team. I think it was the Webster debating team. And they said, we'd like to have you join the club. Oh, I said, I don't think I'm interested. What extra time I have, I'd rather spend in athletics, baseball, little scrub football. But they prevailed. And I didn't, until after I got in, realize I thought that they were after me, but actually there was a new president of the club coming up for election. And it ended up that I was the one they used to get the person in they want.
Kind of the stalking horse early in your career.
And then later, I participated in some of the debates, and finally, in the tryouts for the school debates, I happened to come out first in Roman and Jerry, so we constituted the high school debating team. And we had a teacher by the name of Ira Jones, who was just a delightful person, and he took a real interest in the three of us. And so until his death, we kept that contact with him down through the years.
And of course, the
and I think that
you had with Senator Ruska and Mr. Cutak, rich times for all of you.
It's very unusual, I suppose, for three men to have been together that long and been as close in our associations. And
many attorneys and other members of the judiciary here in Nebraska have had an opportunity of hearing Senator Ruska wax eloquent about his old friend, if I may be so bold to call you Red Robinson in the old days. So were you all in law school at approximately the same time?
No, well, Jerry and Roman, upon graduation, they went to the old Omaha University when it was a big Presbyterian college out in North Omaha. They were there for 2 years, I believe, and then both went to the University of Chicago. I was out of school for a year, working, but about, well, we got out of school in 21, and about January, I decided that I was getting a little too far removed from the books and the studies, and I decided if I was going to try to get back, I'd better do it. So I entered Creighton then in January, or that term anyway. And then I was in the undergraduate school for 2.5 years, and then in the law school. They both, I think, they both got an arts degree, maybe. And Jerry Cutak stayed on and went to the University of Chicago Law School.
Where his son Bob ultimately went to law school, too.
Yes, and was very active. Roman, it runs in my mind that he came back and took his last 2 years at Creighton Law School.
Yes, he did graduate from the Creighton Law School because, like yourself, he's regarded today as one of the most distinguished alums of the institution.
Well, I thought he got out of law school in 29, or in 28. I got out in 27. But I think he got out in 29. When he did get out, he was casting about for a place to light, and I had my hat hanging with Charlie Reed and Bill Randall and a couple of other fellas. And I said, well, why don't you come in with me? Reed said, well, I don't know about that fella. I said, oh, I think you would like him very much. And of course, he hadn't been there 6 months till Reed and everybody else thought they wanted to get something done, turn it over to Rowan. And then later, of course, we formed the firm, a young firm, Reed, Ramsey, and Robinson. Roman came in with us as an associate, and then later became a member of the firm.
Judge, you know, in this day and age, many of the people graduating from law school, in fact, even before they come to law school, they express a concern about getting a job. And sometimes the gray beards say to them, in the old days when we started out, what you had was a license to practice a great profession, and you went out and hustled and did the work. There weren't jobs in the sense that a kid would go today to a Wall Street law firm and make $65,000 a year fresh out of law school. What was it like
You're
when you got
top man in your class. They say they'd give you $50 a month.
Mm-hmm. $50 a month in those days. And what did that mean in terms of guarantees? There were none, were there?
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. You just do what it guaranteed you was a chance to fail.
As I remembered, when I got out in 27, I first associated with a Gerald Lavalette. I guess a Frenchman, but and just in office space. And he officed right next to Jess Palmer, with whom Seymour Smith was officing. Well, they did have one of the unusual complete libraries, and fortunately for me, I could go right from Gerald's office next door into the library, and that the advantage. And I used to see Seymour Smith there, and that's where I first met him. And I remember one time I went in and I said, Seymour, I've got quite a problem. I don't know just how to plead in this case, because... And he looked at me and he said, oh, don't worry about that. Dick, he said, when in doubt, plead fraud. Well, I never let, every time I had an opportunity, if I were saying a few words at a group, I'd always talk about Seymour, plead fraud.
It's a wonderful story. What was the nature of your practice when you first got out of law school, Judge?
Well, I just, frankly, I had to think about trying to eat alone. And...
you didn't have the luxury of saying,
no.
I'll only take the blue silk stocking cases.
No. But I had worked at the UP, and I'd worked at Grandin, and I'd just done so many things just to keep busy and to bring in an honor or two. And so when I started out, I took anything that came along. Some people were kind to me and would, kind of, I don't mean throw you a bone, but give you something so that keep you busy. And then I organized the dry cleaners. They were at that time primarily interested in keeping the level of prices up to, I think it was $1.50. And then it got down to 50 cents. And so I had, when I was going to law school, I had worked for a little fellow that had a little tailor shop out north. And I'd take the truck and go to my classes. And then when I got through, I would scatter around and pick up a few clothes. And I had gotten in with the commander, or the commanding officer at Fort Omaha. In those days, they had a lot of people out there. And he would let me jawbone them. In other words, he knew I was going to law school and I trying to make a dollar. And so he let me turn my bills in, and then when they payday, they come around and they take mine out if there's anything to take out. So I had that, and what is Fort Crook is now sacked, of course. And so through the fella that did the cleaning, Earl Thornton, one night I was driving downtown, and he came along in his big Marmon, and he honked at me, and he said, "Say, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, pretty good." He said, "You know, Dick, they're having a meeting of the dry cleaners. Their executive secretary has just left town, and they're looking for somebody. Would you be interested?" Well, I said, what would it know? Oh, he said, take a few hours at night. And I said, well, sure. So I went up to Drescher Brothers. In those days, there were Drescher's Panatorium and Jordan. And so I was organizing. They paid me a couple $100 a month. I didn't
Must
have...
seem like a fortune.
I suppose it did. And I would... Didn't take any of my time except in the evenings. And primarily my time was concerned with the little press shop owners, you know, the fellas. Because they would tempt at this, if the price was $1.50, say $1 or $1. And really it was a tremendous experience for me to greet a group of 75 or 80.
Oh, I can
And we all wanted to talk at once, you know. But, so I had that for a couple of years, and by that time I got out in 28. We formed the new firm in 1930. And by that time, we had some fairly substantial business clients. We had General Motors Acceptance Corporation, which was the financing, and was Charlie Reed's, and Al Ramsey had some real estate firms. He'd been with Broken Ellick and Raymond.
Yes.
And so then when we formed the firm, so I find that
Were there 4 of you, or 5 in the firm at the time?
No, there were 3 to start
3
with.
to start.
And finally Roman came in.
And finally Senator Ruska.
And we had 3 or 4 associates. Yale Koloff,
Yes.
who is now a multimillionaire out in California. He worked closely with me in the firm, and his family was moving out. And John Bigelow, who was another classmate of mine, was in California with one of the large insurance companies that had just started in California. And so Yale didn't know what to do, and I said, go out to California and I'll give you a letter to John Bigelow. He went out there, went to work for him, became counsel for them, and was with them for a number of years. And then together with a couple of other men, formed a firm up in, out of Oakland someplace. But he's done very well. He's a fine trial lawyer.
You gentlemen then had a practice that was a very successful commercial practice. I presume litigation went along with it.
And we had some defense work for some insurance companies.
But I would have suspected even early on in your career, and of course in Senator Ruska's, there was an inclination toward public service as well.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I know that you held office in the city of Omaha later on in your career, but did you get started working your way up in politics, in local politics, in the 30s?
Well, Charlie Reed, was always very active in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Never, to my knowledge, never sought public office, but he was very active in Republican politics. And I guess I just kind of followed along, and I never sought any public office. I did run for the school board one time,
Mm-hmm.
and but didn't make it. And then I was appointed to finance commissioner of the city of Omaha.
Finance commissioner of the city of Omaha. Well, you served on the airport commission for a little while.
On the airport, I was on the airport commission. When I talked when I should have been listening. And before I knew it, I was in too deep, and so I had to go through with it. I assured them that I would not, under any circumstances. By that time, I had a pretty, well, Al Sorensen was a client of mine, and I started out, Carl Renstrom
Yes.
Was a client of mine, and all of these young fellas who later became multimillionaires, all I started out on. And I suppose that's why I got along as well as I did.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of looked for those fellas looked to me like they were coming along.
Looked like they were going to make it.
And as a matter of fact, I figured out the other day that if I probated all of their estates, but, well, I left the old firm. It was part in 1930, and I left it in 42, and went over with Bill Shaw and just on an office arrangement. And it's hard to say. How these things piece together, you know.
Oh, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. In your practice, your early practice, and then, of course, up to the time of your mature practice, as we could call it, you obviously had an opportunity to meet and to see in action some great judges, both state and federal. Share with us a few of your recollections about some of those wonderful personalities.
Well, of course, starting first, of course, on our own Douglas County bench, we had Judge Reddick. I don't know whether you would remember. A wonderful person, and Judge Leslie, Judge Hastings, who was the picture of an equity judge, you know. I remember I went over at one time, I'd gone down to Lincoln to get a bill introduced in the legislature in 29 to exempt or to try to get the gas tax on gasoline solvent that they use in the cleaning process exempted. Well, we first filed a suit up in the state court, and I'll never forget Judge Hastings. He tall and angular. I think at one time he'd been dean of Nebraska Law School. But he looked down and he said, "Young man, I appreciate your earnestness and your sincerity in the approach to your handling of this case. But," he said, "I'm sorry to tell you that you've come to the wrong place. You should go to the legislature," because so I did. And that was a great experience, believe me. The old two outlets.
Oh, yes.
And I followed that through Chet Wynn from who was at that time football coach here at Creighton, was in the legislature, and there were many that, but I learned a little bit more about practical matter about how legislation is.
Did you do a lot of lobbying in your practice then?
Well,
things went on, Judge?
I did, of course, on that particular bill, and occasionally, but not.
There wasn't a central part of your practice.
No. Of course, we had clients that we watched in later years. We had 3 or 4 that we kind of, if we didn't handle it ourselves, we watched it and saw that it was handled.
When you first began the practice of law, it would be correct that Judge Munger was a federal judge down in Lincoln?
He was in Lincoln, yes.
And was Judge Donahue on the bench here in Omaha?
Judge Woodruff.
Judge Woodruff.
Judge Donahue came on in 1934. Judge Woodruff had come on in 1916. And then
he was later to go to the circuit, wasn't he?
Judge Woodruff went to the circuit, was elevated to the circuit, and Judge Donahue was appointed to succeed him.
I see.
And then I was appointed in '56 to succeed Judge Donahue. And in the meantime, Judge Delahunt had been appointed following a year or two, I would suppose, Judge Donahue. But they were the district judges.
Judge Woodruff was a universally revered and colorful gentleman, as I understand.
Yes. He was just a wonderful person, so kind. I remember my first appearance before him. I had an old uncle who had died, and Mother, I know, had paid the premium on a fraternal policy. I think it was $2,000 or $3,000. And his family had died, and so when the uncle died, seems to me it was a brother of mine, he was, and a cousin had been named as beneficiary. Well, George R. Nelson C. Pratt, who represented the insurance company at that time, filed an interpleader action down in federal court. And so I went down. And of course, they're restricted in who can be an affianced wife or a member of the family.
Yes.
Well, I had to do a lot of screeching, but the uncle had lived with an aunt of mine who was a widower, and her son and daughter. So I used this before Judge Woodruff, and he hung his hat on it and found for me. But he was, he walked, for example, every day from his home in Ralston to the courthouse, and it was almost legend, his walking.
Walked all over the city of Omaha and every place else he went.
All over.
I'd heard a story that when he was on the circuit court, he walked all over the city of St. Louis.
It got so that the visiting judges were a little bit shy when he'd say,
"Let's go for a walk."
And he took my law clerk, Bob Cutag, and another law clerk, and his then law clerk, Dick Bruckner. I think when he was 80 or 81, they went to Europe, over to Switzerland, and corralled him out. And I guess he wore them out.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
Well, Judge Donahue was a different kind of a gentleman from Judge Woodruff,
Well,
in the sense that he was not physically active, peripatetic, one might say. Huh?
no, and there were different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
They tell the story, for example, of Judge Woodruff. He was just so kind and so human, I guess. But one day down in St. Louis, you're familiar with the courtroom down there, and one morning Judge Woodruff was in there with a little black alpaca coat that he generally wore, you know, bustling around, and this very important lawyer came in and said, "Hey, can you get me a book?" Judge Woodruff said, "Well, yes, what book did you want?" I guess he thought he was the bailiff. And so he said, "I want so-and-so." So Judge Woodruff got him the book. And I don't know that he even said thank you. But I guess when the judges approached the bench and this fellow saw Judge Woodruff take his place on the bench, he probably had quite a bit of a shock.
What a wonderful story. What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
It's often been said, Judge, that a young man or woman who aspires to the federal judiciary is probably never going to make it. It's the person who aspires to being a competent, respected, great lawyer who, for some reason or another, will be tapped by the president of his own political party, most likely. And was that the case with the Honorable Richard Robinson?
Well, I think you just have to say yes. I always get a kick out of Judge Devitt's 10 Commandments. And one of them was, don't be afraid to say you know a senator.
Uh-huh.
But with me, actually, I had never had any aspiration to go on the bench. The only office that I thought if I ever had an opportunity that I'd like to have, if I could afford it, was the federal judgeship.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I guess I don't know how you could plan for it.
Mm-hmm. There's no way that it would be possible to train for it. I mean, as apparently it is in the Federal Republic of Germany, where a person can go to judges school.
No.
Here, you just have to be competent,
Right.
because you face so many screenings that a ringer isn't going to get on the federal bench.
Yes, I suppose that.
You were still a very young man in the scope
I
of
was
things
53.
when you went on the
Yeah.
bench. That's asking a good sacrifice of an individual to break away in the middle of his practice, though, isn't it?
Just fortunately for me, I had reached a point where both my sons, they'd both gone to Creighton Prep, and then they went to Yale, and they got out in 57, yes, the year after I was appointed. They still had the professional schools that have them, but I was at least where I could see my way. And years, and that's, I practiced 29 years.
Yes.
And I'm in my 30th year.
30th year on the bench. That's right.
So I suppose it's probably time to turn in my chips. But
Well, I don't think there's anybody in the profession in this legal community who would agree with you on that one, Judge. What would you say were the factors that would be looked at by an administration 30 years ago in selecting the judges? Perfectly candidly, we obviously wanted a competent person with an excellent reputation for integrity in the community, but were there other things as well?
Oh, I think that pretty generally covers it. And I don't believe there's too much difference. Today, with computers and everything else.
There have been some changes over the years. Some people have opted, for example, for the creation of nominating commissions in the federal districts or in the federal circuits and so forth, and yet the American Judicature Society seems to suggest that the quality is pretty much the same, in as much as that you're getting a fine quality of man and woman by and large to sit on the federal benches.
Well, I don't know, but it's been my opportunity to, whether it was by happenstance or luck, but immediately upon, as I say, I've been on the bench a year when the situation developed down in Arkansas at Little Rock, and I was down there for 5 weeks, and Judge Harper and I took 100 cases off the calendar. Now, we can't claim too much.
Now, for the sake of our viewers, Judge, we're talking about the time where the integration issue was at its very peak. And, of course, Little Rock is in the United States Court of Appeals 8th Circuit. Yeah. And you had to go down there by designation to sit on the bench and help sort out and solve those problems.
Well, actually, the calendar was really stagnating because, for some reason, the local judges weren't functioning, but anyway, what I started to say was, starting with that, I guess I've been assigned to almost every circuit in the United States except the District of Columbia and in the 7th. And the judges, by and large, are just a solid group. I know Judge Johnson told me when at my installation, he said, now I think Brother Robinson will soon find that he's not just another judge, but part of a great integrated group. And that's the feeling that I certainly have experienced. And they're just, all of them, a fine group of men and women.
Women today.
Yes.
Shortly after you came to the judiciary, your very dear friend and longtime friend, Judge Robert Van Pelt, was named within a year of your time, wasn't he?
Judge Van Pelt, Judge Delahunt became senior judge when I was appointed, after Judge Donahoe passed away. And Judge Delahunt, I think, if the truth were known, was hoping that Judge Van Pelt, even though Judge Delahunt was a Democrat, and Van Pelt was a very active Republican. I think Judge Delahunt respected and revered Judge Van Pelt so much that he was hoping that he would make a try for it. And because of that, he took senior status, I'm sure, a year or two earlier than he otherwise might have.
So that Judge Van Pelt could be appointed.
And Judge Van Pelt was appointed, and well, until Judge Delahunt died, it was just a very congenial and happy arrangement.
Now, after the appointment of Judge Van Pelt, Judge Delahunt left the state for a while so that Judge Van Pelt could get his feet wet, and then he came to Omaha, didn't he?
Well, I didn't know that he had left unless he went on an assignment.
Went on assignment, I think, would be
He
a
went
fairer
to
thing
Pittsburgh several times. He went to California a number of times. And he did move to Omaha from Lincoln. He moved his residence from Omaha. And, but
we were visiting before we had begun this taping, Judge, and you were commenting that in your early years on the bench, when business needed to be done, you could get on the phone and call Judge Van Pelt down in Lincoln, and very informally things could be done. And today, of course, there's more of a caseload, and there's more paperwork and so forth and so on. I wonder if you'd describe that development for us.
Well, of course, I'm not in the everyday swing now of the detail. The active judges are, of course, very busy, and but, for example, when I came on the bench, Judge Dono had a practice of calling, say, one jury case a week. We'd have a call in the spring of the jury cases that were to be for trial, and a call in the fall. And then he would take those, maybe one a week. Well, now, of course, because of the press of work, for example, in 1956, the total caseload in Nebraska was roughly, give or take a few, about 350 cases. Today, that same caseload, although, albeit, it's a different type of litigation than we had then. But the caseload today is about 1,850.
Oh, my heavens.
Now, it's true that in those days, we had only 2 active judges, and now we have 3 active judges. But it's so one can understand why they have to have order, they'll have chaos. So now they start out by, under the rules, by when a case is filed, immediately it's noted, a slip goes out for counsel to immediately set forth certain data and information pertaining to it. Then eventually a pretrial order goes out, and discovery is set, and that's very carefully watched. Well, back in our days, we just took it one at a time. But it's amazing to me For example, one difference with the civil rights legislation, we're seeing types of cases that
they never existed before.
Never existed before.
Do you think we're making effective use today, Judge, of the United States magistrate?
Oh, actually, when you stop and think, we had no magistrates in mind. I started the first, just an experiment with Dick Beck after I was appointed clerk. Bob and I appointed him. We were fortunate to get him. And he came in one day and wanted to know if I'd be interested in maybe having him try to pre-trial. So I said, sure. And he did. The bar liked it. And, of course, now everything is pre-tried. But I remember Al Murrow, who was now gone, was chief judge of the 10th Circuit, and he kind of fathered the pre-trial. But Judge Delahan was very active in that, and he'd gone to a meeting, and somebody said to him, "Do you know," of course this is after he was senior judge, "do you know that your clerk there was doing some preaching?" And actually, that's been followed now by a lot of the other courts around the...
Absolutely, and it's regarded by the bar as one of the most efficient developments that's transpired in our profession. We've also had that kind of a change in regard to the bankruptcy judge. We've gone from the designation of referee to a judge today. How do you feel that's working out?
Well, it seems to be working out pretty well.
Of course, you would remember from your own practice that period of time during the Great Depression when I suppose there were a large number of bankruptcies filed.
Well, there were, and we had referees then, and I'll tell you, Herman I was referee for many years, and that place was just, his office was up in the old security building, and that was the busiest part of the whole court. Well, outside of the bootleggers during Prohibition. But I'm sure Bob Van Pelt could fill you in on a lot of good stories about that, because he was, I'm sure he was in the United States Attorney's Office during the Prohibition era.
Yes, he was, and he has shared some of those stories with us for this series. There's a suggestion today, Judge, that the judiciary is too powerful in the United States. There are some voices that are suggesting that judges ought to be reined in, and I'm sure there are probably some isolated abuses. But what's your observation about the balance of power in our great country today, particularly as it relates to the federal judiciary? Well, there's some who say, for example, that federal judges have taken over schools and they've taken over prisons and mental hospitals and so forth and so on.
Well, there's a good article on that. You've probably read it. Borg wrote the introduction, and I was trying to think of the author. He was a recognized constitutional authority, but it just came in the other day. Well, I don't, certainly I would not be less than humble if I attempted to express any opinion, but I don't believe that there's any real danger. I do think there's been a tendency sometimes to legislate rather than adjudicate, if you know what I mean.
Certainly.
And I think that was probably quite evident during the Warren Court years. But it seems to me that it has a tendency to
Level itself
level
off.
off.
There's been some movement at the state level to return to the day of the elected state judiciary. We've had a good experience in Nebraska with so-called merit selection of judges, and of course it has been a tradition forever in the federal judiciary to have appointment of the most qualified individual. What about the selection of judges?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think someone like yourself would probably certainly agree with me that as opposed to electing judges, there just can't be any comparison. Because I think back to, the 20s. There were judges elected to our state court and even to our Supreme Court. People voted for names. The Days were a pretty good example. Remember Bill Day?
Yes.
But LBJ, who was on the Domestic Relations Court. And then when he went to the Supreme Court, Bill came out and stuff. People didn't. I just think it would be a very serious setback to go back to the election system.
When you first went on the bench, you had the opportunity to hire a very bright young man, the person's Bob Kutak, come as your clerk. There have been some changes over the years in terms of the authorization for federal judges for increased numbers of clerks. Do you think today, as you view the active members of courts all over this land, that we're providing sufficient support services for them in the persons of clerks and the modern technology and so forth?
Well, I don't know that I'm really qualified to speak out on that. It seems to me that by comparison with what Bob and I experienced when we were back in active service, I think that whereas we all were entitled to one clerk and then eventually two clerks, now I think all of them have at least two, and some of them as many as 3 and 4. Now I don't know what determines that, but I really think they're. I think they have enough help.
It's been said that the judge and the clerk develop a very warm relationship. And over the years, a good number of very competent young lawyers coming out of our law schools had the great opportunity, the privilege, if you will, to work for you or for Judge Van Pelt. From the judge's point of view, what is it like to groom the young clerk?
I always say that as far as I'm concerned, it's kept me young because it challenges.
Yes.
I, early on, have always told all of my clerks that I don't want them to agree with me just because I say so-and-so. I want and we have some pretty good go-around. But I said, there's only one thing I reserve the right to call the shots. But up to that point, anything goes. And, I tell you, to me, as I look back over the last 30 years, that's been the joy of the work, that the association with the younger clerks, you know, well, of course, since the last 15 years now that I've been in senior status, why, I've taken so many assignments, and they all have gone with me, and really, I just think it's great. And you just love to see them develop and
That's
go
right.
on.
I'm sure that's a great honor for you, too.
Yeah.
We've had the opportunity today to visit with the Honorable Richard Robinson, United States District Judge in senior status here in the District of Nebraska. This is one of a series of oral histories being done on behalf of the United States District Court Historical Society. It's been a great joy and privilege, Judge Robinson, to be able to visit with you informally like this.
Well, it's been my pleasure indeed.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.